This is the first of two talks about how I built Satoshis Place. And in this first part, I'm going to walk you through the thought process of coming up with the idea for Satoshis Place. And I'll show you roughly the sequence of events that led up to the launch of the game. If you don't mind, let's keep questions until the end so I can just plow through these. So first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is João. I'm also known as Lightningk0lala or simply Koala, so you can take your pick. And contrary to popular opinion, I'm not from Australia. I'm actually from Portugal, and I live in the UK. So earlier this year, in March, I was playing around with running Lightning nodes, and I decided to try and set up two nodes, a channel between two nodes, and I wanted to see how much transaction throughput I could get between them. And I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it was in the order of like dozens of transactions per second, and I thought, wow, this is pretty impressive. So I began thinking of ideas that could make use of this characteristic. And eventually I asked myself, wouldn't it be cool to make it rain Satoshis? And here's a little demo of a little prototype I started building. And so basically the scenario was I would be sort of on stage and presenting something about Lightning maybe, and somehow I could make it rain Satoshis on you guys. And yeah, so how do I run this? Oops. Okay, bear with me. Okay, so that's a little game. You can sort of flick coins, and that's basically it.
Do you know the Ghost Rain app?
What?
Ghost Rain app? Do you know
No, I don't. Okay, so right, so problems. I needed the audience to send me invoices. And since the network was still young, I wasn't expecting that there would be routes to those users. And in which case, by the time we set up channels, my presentation would be over. And also, I knew I was going to need capacity on my side to send payments to you guys. So it just seemed like it was going to be a challenge to create a good user experience. So I started thinking about other ideas. And still along the lines of demonstrating throughput, I thought, what if we had a game like Street Fighter where users could be pitted against each other, and you could think of their health as their channel capacity, and as a player took hits, that would basically trigger payments to his opponent. But that was just raising more problems, because now we need the ability to pull payments. That's not the way Lightning works. And second, to prevent cheating, you need an authoritative server that dictates the outcome of the game, and all the other issues about routing capacity was still valid. So I thought, okay, I need to take a step back and just think of a simpler thing to work on. And so one of the problems, I think, is I was trying to do two things. I was trying to send and receive payments. And so I thought, well, let's focus on only sending. And maybe in this way we can narrow down the range of possible ideas. So I began thinking of some of the other characteristics about Lightning, and namely microtransactions, the ability to transact tiny amounts of value. What if there was a way to demonstrate this in a fun and intuitive way? So on April Fool's Day in 2017, the internet witnessed something incredible. Reddit had announced a game/experiment called Reddit Place, and users were presented with a 1 million pixel square canvas, and they were allowed to pick a color from a total of 16 choices. And they could paint any one of those pixels once every roughly 5 minutes, and pixels could be painted over and over again. And the effect was that in order to paint anything significant, you had to cooperate with other people. So the result was just like this variety of human culture and symbols and memes that were represented on the canvas, and people like formed groups to coordinate efforts to paint things, and there were wars waged between rival groups trying to keep their spot, Some people were like conquering and expanding. I think one of the famous ones was like the German flag overtaking the French flag and then turning into the European Union. Yeah, and it was really incredible. The game grew so popular that actually Reddit engineers were like frantically fighting to keep the app running in the background, and they used that cooldown timer to their advantage to reduce the load on their servers. And so after 4 days, the experiment was ended and the internet cried. So that idea was actually inspired by another more than a decade old idea. In 2005, a student from Wiltshire in England called Alex2 created the same 1 million pixel canvas to raise money for his university education. And the idea here was that each pixel would cost $1, and you could have this virtual ad board where advertisers could purchase a slice of the board, and there would be like an image with a hyperlink. And then he actually ended up selling the entire board, and the last couple of pixels were auctioned off. So in total, he actually made more than $1 million. And I didn't actually know about this story before I did Satoshis Place. So yeah, anyway, I settled on the idea that I would do something like Reddit Place. But instead of requiring users to have an account and limit them to 1 pixel per X amount of time, I decided just simply to charge them 1 Satoshi per pixel and let users paint as much or as frequently as they wanted to. And this is not updated, but 1 Satoshi is roughly $0.0006. So it's well below a cent. And the entire board can be painted with roughly like $64. And early on in the development process, I had discussions with friends about potentially making it like a dynamic pricing, but this would introduce a lot of complexity in the application, and it would change the incentives of the game. I established that the ultimate goal was to provide the simplest and the cheapest way for a brand new user to experience Lightning after installing a wallet or a node. Because if you think about it, the first thing most users will probably think of when they install a wallet is like, okay, well, how can I see this working? And so Satoshi's Place was meant to provide an answer to that question. So after choosing a name and buying the domain, I started working on the backend. My background is as a full stack developer, so I already had an idea of what I would need to get it working. I basically wrote tests and started implementing functionality for connecting the Lightning node, encoding and decoding pixels into images, reading and writing into database, and like fleshing out a WebSocket API for eventual clients to interact with the application. And so once I had some of the basic functionality working, I started working on the front end. And before getting into coding, I actually started looking around different open source projects that replicates the Reddit Place. And in the end, I chose to just implement it from scratch because none of them seemed appropriate for what I was doing, and I'd rather like focus on using libraries and tools that I was familiar with. So having some experience, well, a lot of experience as a front-end developer, but not necessarily with HTML5 Canvas, I started focusing on that particular weak point. So I did a bunch of performance testing on a handful of techniques and frameworks to render the pixels in a performant way. And in the end, I ended up settling on Pixie.js, which is a framework for drawing on Canvas. So once I was confident that the pixels could be rendered quickly, I started working on the drawing functionality. And I knew the board was going to be quite big to be displayed on the entire screen. So I also worked on allowing users to scale the board and move it around. And this screenshot shows you some of the early iterations of that experiment. And then eventually I started working on some of the components around the application. And you see the theme here is different from what it is nowadays. You can already see the color palette at the bottom. There's a Satoshi counter at the top, and a bunch of other buttons. And at this point, if you're used to like developing applications, all these new ideas start popping into your head, and you start, oh, wouldn't it be cool to make this and that? And so Yeah, this is pretty common, and my advice here is just to write those down and any bugs that you find, and keep a to-do list that you just keep coming back to prioritize, and focus on just trying to get your app deployed as quickly as possible. Just get that end-to-end flow working, and then you can iterate on that. So here's a screenshot of when I first scaffolded the payment modal. Like most Lightning apps today, you need to present a user with an invoice, and then also probably the node URI. I took inspiration from y'all's actually as a way to understand how that would work for the end user. And here's a photo of an evening when a friend of mine built a Python script to upload images. And these are some of the first images that we uploaded on the game. And yeah, one of the comments I received from my friend was that he wasn't a fan of the colors. So this image here shows you when I started brightening it up, the theme, and attempted to use like playful colors to set like a fun mood of the game. So in terms of software, I chose to use Bitcoin Core for the Bitcoin node, and C Lightning for the Lightning service, with Lightning Charge, which provides a convenient HTTP endpoint and WebSocket to subscribe to incoming payments. For the testnet Lightning nodes, I used Google Cloud because I had some free credits, but eventually those ran out. So I migrated to this cloud provider called Scaleway. It's a pretty cost-effective solution. For the mainnet, I really wanted to run my own Lightning node at home. So yeah, I believe that Bitcoin and Lightning have great potential in not only letting people to be their own bank, but their own payment processor. So in the past, I tried to sync Bitcoin Core on a Raspberry Pi Model 2, and it seemed like it was only barely able to handle the requirements. Nowadays with 3, I think it's much better, but I decided to shop around for alternatives, and so eventually I found Droid XU4. It seemed like a pretty good choice. And yeah, it has 2 gigs of RAM, which I extended with a compression method called ZRAM. And then I had a spare SSD lying around, 2 terabyte SSD lying around, as well as a 64 gigabyte SD card. And that picture there is where the node is at home. It's just a cupboard in the spare bedroom next to Christmas wrapping. So yeah, this is a video of the first time I got testnet payments to work. Because up until that point, I was just bypassing the payment and automatically processing every submission. So this was the first time I actually got the end-to-end flow working. And if you notice, it's like a long delay between the payment being done and the drawing actually taking place. So this is the whole thing I was talking about, trying to get your app to that end-to-end flow state and then iterate on it. So yeah, a lot of work went into optimizing the game to get it to the point where I could get the experience a smooth experience, and get the drawings updated quickly. So I won't go into details about those things now. I'll talk about them in my second presentation. So the official launch date was the 27th of May, and I just sent around some DMs to people I thought that would be interested in on crypto Twitter, Slack, and Telegram. And the first person to really start painting on mainnet was FOMO, the organizer of the hackathon this weekend. I haven't met him yet, so I look forward to that. Yeah, he was one of the first people to give me feedback on the game. And for the first couple of weeks, it was pretty dead. There was some activity in testnet, but that was the mainnet was like that for a long time. And then on the 8th of June, someone on our Bitcoin made a post about the game, and that's when the site started getting a bit more traction. And at the time, I had a notification set up on my phone using a third party, and it actually ran into the API limit, so I stopped receiving notifications. And I just thought, well, yeah, nobody's using it. And then at night, I opened the application and I saw like all this stuff happening, and it was just insane and bizarre.
It's not safe for work.
Sorry?
You said it's not safe for work here.
Yeah. There was a lot of male genitalia in the early days, and there was so much. Sorry?
Did you have to moderate and like review each submission? Or?
No. Permissionless innovation. Yeah, I mean, so this actually became sort of a meme. I saw that people were talking about this particular interesting fact, and so I added a dig counter on the site, which just put a random number between 20 and 100, and people thought that I was actually counting it by hand. Yeah, and here's a screenshot of the Google Analytics around those dates. You can see it's like pretty flat line during the first 2 weeks, and then the Reddit effect was like the first jump, and then once it got to like crypto Twitter, that's like where it took off. And yeah, so I'm gonna end it by showing you a sped up time lapse of the first couple of weeks, if I can get this one. All right, thanks for listening. Any questions?
Do you store a history of each state?
Yeah, so every order is stored in the database. Yeah, so I have a history of all the instances where people were drawing, including the ones which weren't paid.
So that's how you did the replay.
Time lapse. Yeah.
When are you open sourcing it?
Hopefully soon. Yeah.
So your Todd server was supposed to build the Android, or
No.
just the
No, only the nodes, the Lightning node and the Bitcoin node. The rest of the application stack was in a service called Now. It's run by a company called Zeit.
you need to do some load balancing, or
Yeah, they actually do that automatically. So if you build your application as a set of microservices, then once you host it on their servers, they do that automatically.
What sorts of percentage of users ended up paying after they painted some things, you know?
Oh, that's a good question. It was high-ish, above 50%. I'll check the numbers and let you know.
You didn't provide APIs to put images on the page.
Yeah.
So how long did it take for someone to reverse it?
Yeah, it took like just a couple of days. Actually, I think Chaincode Lab was one of the early people to reverse engineer the API. And then there's at one point in, maybe you noticed, there was like the whole board was painted with the FBI seizure notice. That was them. Apparently. That was James, I think. And and then somebody reversed the painting back to a previous state, and that wasn't them. And I wasn't expecting that. Like I was expecting people to reverse engineer the API and then start doing stuff with it, but I didn't expect people to kind of take snapshots of the state and then implement something that would like reverse it. That was pretty cool. So yeah, I wrote some documentation about the API and published it on the GitHub. Eventually, for people to do. So I'll talk about more. I'll talk more about this in the second presentation.
You're probably most people's like first experience with Lightning payment. What was some of the best feedback you got about like user experience problems of doing your first Lightning payment?
I mean, some people complained about like the lack of routes, I guess, in the beginning. I think for the most part it was just positive. People were just excited to be able to try Lightning and participate in it, I guess. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in particular that stands out. Okay, thank you very much.